A reason that transcends any conventional explanation you've heard until now. It's a reason that has to do with the very architecture of reality, with that invisible web that connects all things, and that I have called the synergetic matrix of the universe. You see, during my years of research in the laboratory, studying the electroencephalograms of shamans, of mystics, of people in altered states of consciousness, I began to perceive a pattern, something that the rational mind initially rejects, but that direct experience confirms time and time again. Our brain, that marvelous structure we carry inside our skull, is not just the information processor that traditional neuroscience describes. It is much more than that. It is a receiver, a decoder of information that exists in the very field of universal consciousness. And here is what I want to share with you in this very intimate moment of our conversation. When the universe suddenly takes something from you, when that loss arrives like a bolt of lightning that splits your life in two, what is really happening is that your consciousness is being freed from a bond that was preventing it from expanding to its true potential. It's as if we had been living in a small room, believing that those four walls were the whole world, until suddenly someone knocks down one of those walls, and we discover that there is an entire universe waiting for us outside. Before continuing with this profound reflection, I want to ask you for something from the heart. If these words are resonating within you, if you feel that something is stirring in your consciousness as you listen to them, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and share with me in the comments what you are feeling right now. Your experience is valuable. It is part of this network of consciousness that connects us all. Also, please give this a like if you feel this message could help someone else who is going through a similar moment. Now, let's continue this exploration together. During my research with people who had developed extraordinary perceptual abilities, I discovered something fascinating. All of them, without exception, had gone through experiences of profound loss. I'm not just talking about material losses, but those losses that touch the very core of our identity. The death of a loved one, the collapse of a relationship they thought was eternal, the loss of a physical ability, the crumbling of a life project they had built for years. What I observed in their brain patterns was extraordinary. It was as if their brains had been reconfigured, as if new neural connections had emerged from the ashes of what was before. It was like witnessing the birth of a new way of perceiving reality. And this was no coincidence. It was the physical manifestation of something much deeper that was occurring at the level of consciousness itself. Allow me to explain this through the synergetic theory, which is the result of decades of research and direct experience. Imagine for a moment that reality is not what it seems. Imagine that everything you perceive through your five senses is just a small fraction of what really exists, as if you were looking at reality through a very small window, and suddenly someone opened the curtains completely. The synergetic theory proposes that there is a field of information, a field of consciousness that permeates the entire universe. This field is not separate from you. It is not something external. You are part of it, and it is part of you. Your brain, your nervous system, your entire biological structure is constantly interacting with this field, receiving information, processing it, and also sending information back. But here's the crucial part. Most of us live with very dense perceptual filters. These filters are built by our beliefs, our fears, our expectations, and yes, also by our attachments. Every time we cling to something, every time our identity merges with a person, an object, a situation, we are creating a filter that prevents us from perceiving reality in its totality. When the universe suddenly takes something away from you, what it is doing is removing one of those filters. It's painful, I know. It's like having a part of your skin torn off. But that pain, that feeling of emptiness, is precisely the evidence that something profound is changing in your perceptual structure. It is the sign that your consciousness is preparing to access new levels of perception. I remember an experience I had many years ago when I lost my teacher, a wise man who had guided me in my first steps toward understanding the mysteries of the mind. His death was sudden, unexpected. One day, he was there sharing his knowledge with me, and the next, he was gone. The pain I felt was indescribable. It was as if I had lost not just a teacher, but a part of myself. For weeks, He sank into a deep depression. I couldn't understand why the universe had taken away the person I needed most at that moment in my life. But as the days passed, as I processed that loss, I began to notice something strange. It was as if my perception had sharpened. I could feel things I hadn't felt before, perceive connections I hadn't seen before. One night, while meditating in my laboratory, surrounded by the equipment I used to measure brain activity, I had an experience that forever changed my understanding of loss. Suddenly, I could perceive my teacher's presence, not as a hallucination, not as a product of my grieving mind, but as a tangible reality, on a different level of consciousness. It was as if I had accessed a frequency of reality that was previously denied to me. And I understood in that moment of absolute revelation that the loss of my teacher on the physical plane had been necessary for me to connect with him on a much deeper and more permanent plane. His physical departure had removed the filter of dependence. It had forced me to develop my own perceptual capacities. This experience led me to understand something fundamental about the nature of sudden losses. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, knows exactly which perceptual filters we need to remove to access our next level of conscious evolution. And many times these filters are so deeply rooted in our identity that the only way to remove them is through experiences that shake us to our very foundations. Think of it this way. If you had to teach someone to fly who has lived their whole life convinced that walking is the only way to move, how would you do it? You would probably have to create a situation where walking was no longer an option. Only then would that person be forced to discover that they had wings they had never used. When the universe suddenly takes something from you, it is offering you the opportunity to discover abilities, perceptions, and ways of being in the world that you never even knew existed. It is pushing you toward an expanded version of yourself, a version that cannot emerge as long as you remain attached to the limitations of your current identity. In my research with altered states of consciousness, I have observed that people who have experienced profound losses develop what I call synergetic vision. It is the ability to perceive the invisible connections that exist between all things, to feel the flow of information that is constantly moving through the field of universal consciousness. This vision is not a special gift reserved for a select few. It is a natural capacity of human consciousness that is activated when we remove the filters that block it. And the pain of loss, as paradoxical as it may seem, is one of the most powerful catalysts for this activation. Let me share another experience with you that illustrates this point. A few years ago, I worked with a woman who had lost her son in a car accident. The pain she felt was so intense, it seemed to be consuming her from the inside. She had lost not only her son, but seemingly the very reason to live. When she arrived at my laboratory, her brain activity showed patterns that I had only seen in cases of severe trauma. But we decided to work together, not to eliminate her pain, but to understand what that devastating experience was trying to teach her. During our sessions, something extraordinary began to happen. As she allowed herself to fully feel her pain without resisting it, without trying to escape from it, her brain activity began to change. Patterns appeared that I had only observed in very advanced spiritual masters, patterns that indicated a deep connection with expanded levels of consciousness. One day, during a particularly intense session, she had what I can only describe as an experience of direct communication with her son. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't wishful thinking. The brain patterns we recorded that day were consistent with states of telepathic communication I had previously documented in my research with shamans. She described the experience to me with tears in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of pain, but of a deep understanding. Her son had shown her that his physical death had been part of a larger plan, a catalyst for her to develop perceptual abilities she would need for the work that was to come. Years later, that woman became an extraordinary healer, able to help other people who had gone through similar losses. What I want you to understand is that your current pain, that feeling of emptiness you feel for what the universe has taken from you, is not an arbitrary cruelty. It is the very process through which your consciousness is preparing to expand into new territories of perception and experience. In synergetic theory, we talk about what I call conscious neuroplasticity. It is the brain's ability to reorganize itself not only in response to external stimuli, but in response to changes at the level of consciousness. When you experience a profound loss, when something fundamental in your life is suddenly transformed, your brain literally begins to form new neural connections. But these are not ordinary connections. They are connections that allow you to access information that exists in the synergetic field, that field of universal consciousness of which we are all a part. It is as if the loss has removed the obstacles that were preventing certain frequencies of information from reaching your consciousness. This explains why many people, after going through experiences of profound loss, develop intuitive abilities they didn't have before. They begin to perceive things that are going to happen before they happen. They feel the presence of people who have passed away. They have profound insights into the nature of reality. It's not magic. It's not something supernatural. It is simply the activation of the natural capacities of human consciousness that had been dormant, blocked by the perceptual filters that the loss took care of removing. I want you to understand something very important. The process of expanding consciousness through loss is not instantaneous. It's not that one day you lose something and the next you already have access to new levels of perception. It is a gradual, sometimes painful process that requires a great deal of patience with yourself. In my observations, I have noticed that this process has several stages. First comes the shock, the denial, the feeling that the world has become unrecognizable. Then comes the deep pain, that feeling of emptiness that seems impossible to fill. Then comes the resistance, the fight against what has happened, the desperate desire for things to go back to how they were before. But if you allow the process to continue, if you don't get stuck in any of these stages, you eventually arrive at what I call conscious surrender. It is the moment when you stop fighting against what has happened and start asking yourself, what is this experience trying to teach me? It is at this stage that the real transformation begins. Your consciousness, freed from the energy it was spending on resisting what had already happened, can begin to explore new territories of perception. It is as if you had been swimming against the current for a long time, and suddenly you decide to let the river carry you, and you discover that it is taking you to more beautiful places than you had ever imagined. During this stage, many people begin to experience what I call synergetic synchronicities. These are those moments when the universe seems to conspire to send you exactly the information, the opportunity, or the person you need at the precise moment. They are not coincidences. They are manifestations of your new ability to perceive and interact with the synergetic field of consciousness. I remember the case of a man who lost his company after decades of work. It was his entire life. His identity was completely fused with his role as a successful entrepreneur. When everything collapsed, he thought it was the end of the world. But after going through the process I am describing to you, he began to notice that he had a natural ability to understand people's energetic patterns. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but as he paid more attention, he realized that he could perceive the emotional and mental state of people with extraordinary accuracy. This ability, which had been dormant during all his years as a businessman, had been activated after the loss of his company. He eventually became a counselor and facilitator of personal transformation processes, helping other people navigate their own crises and losses. His initial loss had not been the end of his story, but the beginning of a much more significant and satisfying chapter. This pattern repeats itself over and over again. The universe suddenly takes something from us because our consciousness needs to expand, and that expansion cannot happen while we continue to cling to the limitations of our current identity. It's as if we were butterflies trying to emerge from our cocoon, but desperately clinging to our identity as a caterpillar. Sudden loss is the moment when the cocoon breaks, regardless of whether we are ready or not. It is painful, it is disorienting, but it is absolutely necessary for our transformation. In synergetic theory, we understand that consciousness has its own cycles of expansion, very similar to the natural cycles we observe in nature. There are times to sow, times to grow, times to harvest, and times for everything old to die, to make space for the new. Sudden losses often coincide with these moments of conscious death, where our consciousness needs to let go of everything that no longer serves it, to make room for new abilities, new perceptions, new ways of being in the world. But here comes something very important that I want you to understand. The fact that these losses are necessary for our conscious evolution does not mean we should minimize the pain they cause. The pain is real, it is valid, and it is an important part of the transformation process. In my years of research, I have learned that trying to avoid the pain of loss is like trying to avoid the pain of childbirth. It is possible to do so, but doing so prevents the natural process of transformation from being completed. The pain of loss is not something we should eliminate, but something we must learn to navigate with wisdom and compassion for ourselves. When you allow pain to flow through you without resisting it, something magical happens. The pain itself becomes a catalyst for the expansion of your consciousness. It's as if each wave of pain were removing layers of perceptual limitations that had been blocking your access to new levels of consciousness. I have observed this in my own processes of loss and transformation. Every time I have lost something I believed was fundamental to my identity, I have gone through periods of intense pain. But I have also learned to trust the wisdom of these processes, to allow the pain to do its work of cleansing and transformation. And every time, without exception, I have emerged from the process with perceptual abilities I didn't have before, with a deeper understanding of the nature of reality, with a clearer connection to the synergetic field of universal consciousness. This doesn't mean I have become immune to pain. It means I have learned to see pain as a teacher, as a catalyst for transformation, as an invitation from the universe to expand my consciousness into new territories of perception and experience. I want to share with you a reflection that has emerged from decades of research and personal experience. The universe is not cruel. It is not indifferent. It is not arbitrary in its actions. The universe is intelligent. It is compassionate. It is profoundly wise, but it operates from a much broader perspective than our limited human perspective. From our human perspective, the sudden loss of something we love seems like an inexplicable cruelty. But from the perspective of the universe, from the perspective of universal consciousness, that loss is exactly what we needed to access our next level of evolution. It's as if we were children playing in a small room, completely absorbed in our toys, not knowing that there is a huge park waiting for us outside. Sometimes someone has to come and take our toys away, so that we look up and discover that there is a much bigger and more beautiful world available to us. Sudden loss is that hand that takes away our toys. It hurts because we were attached to them, because we had built our identity around them. But once the initial pain subsides, once we allow ourselves to explore this new space we find ourselves in, we discover possibilities we would have never imagined while we were absorbed in our old patterns. In synergetic theory, we talk about the concept of conscious resonance. It is the idea that our consciousness is constantly resonating with different frequencies of the universal synergetic field. When we are very attached to something, when our identity is fused with a specific person, object, or situation, our resonance becomes very narrow, very limited. Sudden loss has the effect of breaking those patterns of limited resonance, creating space for our consciousness to tune into much broader and richer frequencies of the universal field. It's as if we had been listening to a single radio station for years, and suddenly someone gave us a radio that can pick up thousands of different stations. At first, all that variety can be overwhelming, even frightening. But as we learn to navigate these new frequencies of consciousness, we discover riches and possibilities that transcend anything we have experienced before. This explains why so many people, after going through experiences of profound loss, report fundamental changes in their perspective on life. It's not just that they have learned to value what they have, it's that they have literally accessed new levels of perception that allow them to see reality from much broader and richer perspectives. Many develop what I call temporal perception, the ability to feel how present events are connected to larger patterns that extend into the past and the future. Others develop interdimensional sensitivity, the ability to perceive aspects of reality that are normally outside the range of the five ordinary senses. These are not mystical abilities reserved for a spiritual elite. They are natural capacities of human consciousness that are activated when we remove the perceptual filters that were blocking them. And sudden loss, as painful as it is one of the most effective catalysts for the removal of these filters. I want you to reflect for a moment on your own experience of loss. Have you noticed subtle changes in your perception since it happened? Have you had insights about situations or people that you didn't have before? Have you felt connections or understandings that seem to come from a place deeper than your rational mind? If the answer is yes, then you are already beginning to experience the first symptoms of the expansion of your consciousness. If the answer is no, don't worry. Each person has their own pace of processing, and some transformations take longer to manifest than others. The important thing is to maintain an attitude of openness and curiosity toward what you are experiencing. Instead of asking yourself, "Why did this happen to me?" start asking yourself, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" Instead of resisting the pain of loss, allow it to flow through you while paying attention to any new insights or perceptions that may arise. Remember that the transformation of consciousness does not always manifest in dramatic or spectacular ways. Sometimes it manifests as a greater sensitivity to the emotions of others, as an increased ability to be present in the moment, as a deeper understanding of the patterns that govern your life. In my research, I have documented cases where people who had lost their sight developed extraordinary perceptual abilities that allowed them to see their surroundings in ways that transcended ordinary vision. I have worked with people who lost loved ones and developed communication abilities that allowed them to maintain contact with them on non-ordinary levels of reality. I have met entrepreneurs who lost everything and discovered creative abilities they didn't know they had. Artists who lost their inspiration and found much deeper sources of creativity. Scientists who lost their certainties and accessed forms of knowledge that transcended traditional scientific methodology. In each case, the initial loss seemed to be the end of something important. But in retrospect, all these people recognized that this loss was the beginning of something much more significant and satisfying than what they had experienced before. This is not blind optimism or magical thinking. It is the recognition of a pattern that consistently repeats itself when we allow the natural processes of consciousness transformation to unfold without excessive resistance. The universe has a profound intelligence, a wisdom that transcends our limited rational understanding. When it suddenly takes something from us, it does not do it to punish us. It does not do it out of cruelty. It does not do it without purpose. It does it because our consciousness is ready to expand into new territories, and that expansion requires that we let go of what no longer serves our growth. It is like the process of pruning that gardeners perform on trees. They cut branches that seem healthy and strong, and from the perspective of the branches, this must seem like an inexplicable cruelty. But the gardener knows that by removing those branches, he is creating space and energy for the tree to grow in new directions, so that it can develop its full potential. Sudden loss is the pruning that the universe performs in the garden of our consciousness. It hurts because we are identified with those branches of our life. But that pruning is what allows us to grow into versions of ourselves that we couldn't even imagine while we were limited by our old patterns of identity. As you move through your process of loss and transformation, remember that you are not alone in this experience. You are part of an infinite network of consciousnesses that are going through similar processes of evolution and expansion. In the synergetic field of universal consciousness, your pain is felt, your transformation is supported, your growth is celebrated. Sometimes in the most difficult moments of your process, you can tune into this support network by simply closing your eyes, breathing deeply, and allowing your heart to open to the vastness of the love that exists in the universe. It is not a sentimental or emotional love. It is the intelligent love of the universe for each of its creatures. The love that manifests as the evolutionary force that is constantly pushing us toward more expanded versions of ourselves. This love is the force that is behind your loss. It is the intelligence that orchestrated the events that seemed so painful and arbitrary. It is the same love that is guiding your transformation process right now. The same love that brought you to these words you are hearing now. Trust in this love. Trust in the wisdom of the universe. Trust that your loss, however painful it may be, is exactly what you needed to access levels of experience and perception that will transform not only your life, but your entire understanding of what it means to exist in this extraordinary universe. Your journey of transformation is just beginning. The abilities you will develop, the perceptions you will access, the contributions you will make to the world from your new expanded perspective All of this is waiting for you on the other side of your current process of loss and renewal. Allow yourself to feel the pain when it comes, but don't get trapped in it. Allow yourself to miss what you have lost, but remain open to what is emerging. Allow yourself to be vulnerable in this process of transformation, because it is through that vulnerability that your consciousness can expand into new territories of experience and perception. The universe loves you enough to take away what was limiting you, to push you out of your comfort zone, to invite you to discover aspects of yourself that you would never have explored if things had remained as they were. That loss that seems so cruel, that absence that hurts so much, is actually the greatest gift the universe could give you at this moment of your evolution. It is your invitation to become who you truly are, beyond the limitations of who you thought you were. Accept that invitation, trust the process, and prepare to discover versions of yourself that will surpass anything you have lost, because they will be based not on external circumstances, but on the infinite richness of your own expanded consciousness. The universe never takes anything from you without giving you something much more valuable in return. It's just that sometimes it takes time to recognize the value of what we have received because it is on a different frequency from what we had lost. But when you finally see it, when you finally understand the magnitude of the transformation you have gone through, you will realize that you wouldn't trade your experience for anything in the world, because you will have discovered that you are much more than you ever imagined yourself to be. In my final years of research, before my own path took unexpected turns, I came to an understanding that I want to share with you as my deepest reflection on this subject. Sudden loss is not just an event that happens to us. It is a direct communication from the synergetic field of consciousness. It is the universe speaking to us in a language that transcends words. Each loss carries encoded information specific to the next step in our conscious evolution. It is as if the universe were an extraordinarily wise teacher who knows exactly what experiences we need to activate the dormant capacities in our consciousness. And many times, those experiences come disguised as losses, as endings, as tragedies. But here is the secret I have discovered after decades of research. There are no real endings in the universe of consciousness, only transformations. What we perceive as death, as loss, as an end, is actually metamorphosis. It is the way consciousness has of renewing itself, of accessing new levels of complexity and beauty. When we understand this on a deep level, when we feel it not just intellectually, but in every cell of our being, our relationship with loss is completely transformed. We no longer see it as something that happens to us, but as something we co-create with the universe for our own growth and evolution. This perspective may sound radical, even disturbing for those who are in the initial stages of the grieving process. And it's okay for it to be that way. Consciousness needs time to adapt to new ways of perceiving reality. It's like when you come out of a dark room into full sunlight. You need time for your eyes to adjust. But I want to plant this seed in your consciousness. The loss you are experiencing right now, however painful it may be, is part of a cosmic conversation between your soul and the universe. It is your soul telling the universe, I am ready for my next level of evolution. And the universe responding, perfect. Then, you need to let go of this to make space for the new. At a quantum level, at the level of pure information that constitutes reality, nothing is ever lost. What we experience as loss at the level of form is reconfiguration at the level of essence. The energy that was invested in what you lost does not disappear. It is released to reorganize itself into new forms of experience and perception. This is perhaps the most profound teaching of the synergetic theory. We live in a universe where information is eternal, where consciousness is indestructible, where every apparent end is actually a new beginning in disguise. Our job as conscious beings is not to resist these processes of transformation, but to learn to flow with them, to trust them, to consciously collaborate with them. And here comes something that can change your perspective forever. You are not a victim of your losses. You are a co-creator of them. At a very deep level of your being, a level that transcends your rational mind and your emotions, you participated in the creation of the conditions that led to that loss. This is not blame. It is not punishment. It is not judgment. It is empowerment. It is recognizing that you have much more power and influence on the events of your life than you imagine. It is understanding that your consciousness is constantly interacting with the synergetic field of the universe, sending signals, receiving responses, co-creating experiences that will serve your evolution. When you reach this understanding, when you truly feel it in the depths of your being, something magical happens. Resentment toward the universe transforms into gratitude. The feeling of being a victim transforms into the feeling of being a collaborator. The fear of future losses transforms into trust in the wisdom of the evolutionary process. I am not saying that the pain disappears. Pain is a natural and necessary response to loss. It is part of the transformation process. But when you understand that your pain is serving a larger evolutionary purpose, when you see that it is part of a cosmic dance of growth and renewal, you can go through it with more grace, with more acceptance, with more confidence in what is to come. In my years of research, I documented extraordinary cases of what I call initiatic loss. These are losses that arrive at specific moments in a person's life, usually when their consciousness is ready to take a quantum leap to new levels of perception and ability. These initiatic losses have very specific characteristics. They arrive suddenly, without warning, removing from the person's life something that seemed fundamental to their identity or happiness. But in retrospect, it can always be seen that this loss came at exactly the right time to catalyze the transformation the person needed. It is as if the universe had perfect timing, an impeccable synchronization with the internal rhythms of evolution of each individual consciousness. And initiatic losses are part of that cosmic timing. They are perfectly orchestrated events to serve the growth and expansion of consciousness. If you are going through one of these losses right now, I want you to know that you have been chosen for an extraordinary transformation. The universe does not waste its initiatic losses on consciousnesses that are not ready to take advantage of them. If you are experiencing this level of loss, it is because your soul is prepared for levels of experience and perception that go far beyond what you have known until now. But the transformation is not automatic. It requires your conscious participation, your willingness to collaborate with the process, instead of simply resisting it. It requires you to develop what I call intelligent surrender, the ability to let go of control without abandoning responsibility, to allow the process to unfold while keeping your consciousness alert and receptive to the teachings it is bringing. This intelligent surrender is an art that is learned with practice. At first, it is natural to alternate between moments of acceptance and moments of resistance. But as you develop more trust in the wisdom of the process, as you see the first fruits of your transformation, surrender becomes more natural, more fluid, more joyful even, because you discover that surrendering to the process of transformation is not losing power. It is accessing a much greater power than you had when you were trying to control everything from your limited perspective. It is like stopping rowing against the current of a river and discovering that the current takes you exactly where you need to go, but much faster and with much less effort than you were investing before. At this point in our conversation, I want to offer you something practical, something you can do to consciously collaborate with your transformation process. It is what I call the ritual of conscious reception. Every day, dedicate a few minutes to sit in silence and ask your loss what it is trying to teach you. Don't look for intellectual answers. Don't try to analyze or rationalize. Simply ask from the heart, and then remain in receptive silence for any insight, sensation, or understanding that may arise. Sometimes the answers come as words, sometimes as images, sometimes as sensations in the body, sometimes as subtle changes in your perception of the world around you. There is no right or wrong way to receive this information. There is only your unique way of accessing the wisdom that is encoded in your experience of loss. Over time, as you practice this ritual of conscious reception, you will begin to develop what I call a synergetic dialogue with your transformation process. It is a form of direct communication with the intelligence that is orchestrating your conscious evolution. This dialogue is not imagination. It is not wishful thinking. It is not self-deception. It is a real and tangible form of communication that becomes available when our consciousness expands beyond the limitations of ordinary rational thought. Through this dialogue, you can begin to consciously collaborate with your transformation process. You can understand not only what is changing in your life, but why it is changing. where it is taking you, and how you can facilitate the process instead of resisting it. Many people who have developed this type of dialogue report a deep sense of being guided, of being part of a larger plan, of having access to a wisdom that transcends their individual rational understanding. This is not dependence or loss of autonomy. It is the recognition that we are part of a collective intelligence much vaster than we can comprehend from our individual perspective, and that we can choose to consciously collaborate with that intelligence instead of feeling separate from it. As you develop this capacity for synergetic dialogue, you will begin to notice that your relationship with uncertainty changes fundamentally. Uncertainty ceases to be something you fear and becomes something you await with curiosity and excitement, because you understand that uncertainty is the space where new possibilities are born, where consciousness can reorganize itself into more complex and beautiful configurations. Uncertainty becomes your zone of cosmic creativity, the laboratory where the universe experiments with you to create expanded versions of who you are. This transformation in your relationship with uncertainty is one of the clearest signs that your process of loss is fulfilling its evolutionary purpose. It is an indication that your consciousness is expanding beyond the limitations of the need for control, beyond the fears that kept your perception constrained to known and predictable territories. When you reach this point in your transformation process, something extraordinary begins to happen in your daily life. You start to notice patterns and connections that were previously invisible to you. You begin to perceive the subterranean currents of meaning that connect all the events of your life. It is as if there were a secret text written in the events of your life, a message that only becomes legible when your consciousness expands enough to perceive the larger patterns. And your loss, that loss that seemed so arbitrary and cruel, reveals itself as a key piece in that larger message. You begin to see how that loss led you exactly where you needed to be for your next phase of growth. You begin to recognize the synchronicities that organized themselves around your loss, the people who appeared in your life just when you needed them, the opportunities that opened up precisely because you had let go of what you used to consider indispensable. This perception of the larger patterns of your life is what I call synergetic vision. It is the ability to see your life from a much broader perspective, to perceive how all events, even the most painful ones, are serving a larger evolutionary purpose. When you develop synergetic vision, your gratitude for life becomes unconditional. It is not a superficial gratitude based on having what you want, but a deep gratitude based on recognizing the perfect wisdom that is operating in every moment of your experience. This unconditional gratitude becomes one of the most powerful forces in your life. It acts as a magnet that attracts to you experiences, people, and opportunities that are aligned with your highest potential. It's as if the universe responds to your gratitude by opening doors you didn't even know existed. But more importantly, this unconditional gratitude frees you from the tyranny of external circumstances. Your well-being, your peace, your sense of purpose no longer depend on what you have or don't have in your external life. They emerge from within, from your connection with the wisdom and beauty inherent in the very process of existence. At this point in our conversation, I want to acknowledge something that may be arising in your mind. You might be wondering if all this is true, if loss is really a gift from the universe. Why does it hurt so much? Why can't it be a gentler, easier process? It is a valid question, and the answer has to do with the very nature of consciousness and transformation. Consciousness, by its very nature, tends to create stable patterns, ways of perceiving and experiencing reality that become familiar and comfortable. These patterns are useful for navigating daily life, but they can become limitations when our evolution requires us to access new territories of experience and perception. And many times these patterns are so ingrained, so fused with our identity, that the only way to remove them is through experiences that shake them to their foundation. The pain of loss is, to a large extent, the pain of these patterns being removed, being reorganized, being transcended. It is like the pain a snake feels when it is shedding its skin. It is uncomfortable. It is intense, but it is absolutely necessary for the snake to grow into its next phase of development. The universe is not cruel in allowing us to experience this pain. It is compassionate in a way that transcends our limited human understanding. It knows that the temporary pain of transformation leads us to levels of fulfillment and realization that we could not access otherwise. It is like a surgeon who has to cause pain to remove something that is preventing the patient's health. The pain is real, but it is the necessary price for a deeper healing. And here comes something very important. The universe never gives us more than we can handle. It never allows us to experience levels of loss or transformation for which our consciousness is not prepared. We may feel overwhelmed, we may feel at the limit of our capacity, but we never truly exceed what we can integrate and transform. This is one of the fundamental laws I have observed in my decades of research. Consciousness has an extraordinary capacity for adaptation and growth, but always within parameters that preserve the basic integrity of the system. It is as if the universe were a perfect personal trainer who knows exactly how much weight each person can handle at each moment of their development. It never gives us more weight than we can lift, but it always challenges us to grow to new levels of strength and capacity. As you move through your current process of loss and transformation, remember that you have within you all the necessary resources to not only survive this experience, but to transform it into the most powerful catalyst for growth you have ever experienced in your life. Those resources include not only your conscious abilities, but also deeper capacities that reside in levels of your being that you may have never fully explored. Loss has a way of activating these deep resources, of connecting you with reserves of strength, wisdom, and creativity that you didn't know you had. Many people discover during their deepest processes of loss that they have access to what I call synergetic resources, capacities of perception, intuition, and creativity that emerge from their connection with the universal field of consciousness. These resources are not supernatural or mystical in the traditional sense. They are natural capacities of human consciousness that are activated when our perspective expands beyond the limitations of the individual ego. They can manifest as sudden insights into complex situations, as an intuitive ability to make important decisions, as creativity to find solutions to problems that seemed insoluble, as emotional strength to navigate difficult circumstances, as deep compassion for others who are going through similar experiences. These synergetic resources develop gradually as you advance in your transformation process. At first, they may manifest in subtle ways that you barely notice, but as your trust in the process develops, as your resistance to the transformation diminishes, yes, these resources become more accessible, more reliable, more integrated into your everyday way of navigating life. Eventually, you reach a point where you recognize that the loss that initially seemed to devastate you has become the source of your greatest abilities and your deepest wisdom. It's not that you have gotten over the loss or left it behind. It's that you have integrated it so completely into your being that it has transformed from a wound into a source of power. This complete integration is the consummation of the initiatic process that began with your sudden loss. It is the moment when you recognize that you have not only survived the transformation, but that you have become a version of yourself that surpasses anything you lost in the process. From this integrated perspective, you can look back on your process and see each phase as perfectly necessary. Each moment of pain is contributing to the strength you now possess. Each moment of confusion is contributing to the clarity you now enjoy. And more importantly, from this integrated perspective, you can begin to serve others who are going through similar processes. Your transformed loss becomes a medicine that you can offer to others who are in the initial phases of their own transformation processes. This is one of the most beautiful gifts of the process. You not only transform yourself, but you become a catalyst for the transformation of others. Your integrated experience becomes a light that can guide others through the darkness of their own processes of loss and renewal. In synergetic theory, we understand that individual consciousness and collective consciousness are intrinsically connected. When a person completes a profound process of transformation, that growth radiates out into the collective field of consciousness, facilitating similar processes in others. It is as if each person who successfully completes their process of transformation through loss creates a groove in the field of consciousness that makes it easier for others to follow a similar path. Your current process of loss and transformation is not just for you. It is also your contribution to the collective growth of human consciousness. It is your participation in the evolution of our species toward higher levels of perception, compassion, and wisdom. This perspective can give you a sense of purpose and meaning that transcends the particular circumstances of your personal loss. You can begin to see your process not just as something that is happening to you, but as something you are doing for the benefit of all humanity. And with this perspective comes a beautiful responsibility. The responsibility to navigate your process with the greatest awareness, compassion, and wisdom you are capable of. Not just for yourself, but for all those who will benefit from the medicine you will be creating through your integrated transformation. As we approach the end of our conversation, I want to leave you with the most important understanding I have developed during my decades of research into the mysteries of consciousness. You are not your loss. You are not your pain. You are not the circumstances that are changing in your life. You are the consciousness that is observing, experiencing, and transforming through all these processes. This consciousness that you are is indestructible. It is infinitely creative. It is profoundly wise. It existed before anything you have lost, and will continue to exist after all the current transformations have been completed. When you connect with this deeper identity, when you recognize that you are the very consciousness that is orchestrating your transformation process, something fundamental changes in your experience of loss. You cease to be a victim of circumstances and become a conscious collaborator in your own evolution. You stop resisting the process and start directing it from within. You stop fearing the future and start creating it from your connection with the infinite wisdom that resides in the deepest part of your being. This is the ultimate truth about sudden losses. They are invitations from your own expanded consciousness to awaken to who you really are, beyond all the temporary identities you have adopted in this life. The universe does not take anything from you to punish you. It takes what you no longer need so that you can discover what has always been: pure consciousness, infinite love, limitless creativity, eternal wisdom. Your loss is your awakening in disguise. Your pain is your expansion in process. Your transformation is your return home to yourself. Trust the process. Embrace the mystery, and prepare to discover that you are far more magnificent than you ever allowed yourself to dream.